Welcome to the Retro Report.
He ended up stripping the building, and I fought him on that. He actually physically threw me out of the building.
Central Terminal belongs to all of us. It doesn't just belong to the people who manage, the volunteers who manage the board.
We will look back on 10, 20, 30, 40 years and say, my gosh, what were they thinking?
The worry about saving it may in fact be what destroys it.
The year was 1929. Prohibition was in full swing, but the country was experiencing an economic boom. Buffalo, New York was one of the largest cities in the nation, and finally, after decades of debate, they had built a passenger rail station to reflect that strength and power. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Retro Report. My name is Eddie Dobashevitz. Tonight, we're going to tell a story of Buffalo Central Terminal, its past, its present, and its future. But in order to tell our tale properly, we have to start before our story even begins.
I've got a mule, her name is Sam, 15 miles on the Erie Canal. She's a good old...
The opening of the Erie Canal in 1821 linked the West with the East. Buffalo was the transfer point, and as a result, it became a very wealthy city. But it was the railroads that made the Queen City a powerhouse.
It was just 20 years after the opening up of the Erie Canal that railroads started to make their presence known in Buffalo. It cut the cost of travel in and out for goods and services further down than even that the canal could never even imagine, and the speed that you could be to these cities within 10, 12 hours. So when you look at it, the railroads were so important. Just in the city of Buffalo alone, you had 700 miles of railroad track.
So why in the world wasn't the Central Terminal built downtown?
I thought downtown was growing because the infrastructure of the city was built for 1 million people. They thought downtown would grow 2.5 miles east, and that would be downtown moving eastward with more development in buildings.
Trains had to back in and back out of downtown to continuing going east or west. That complicated Y movement sometimes took 45 minutes to an hour.
To an industry that relied on timing and efficiency, that type of delay was unacceptable. So, as is typical in Buffalo, they argued for decades, eventually settling on a piece of land near the Union Stockyards on the far east side of the city. But their timing couldn't have been worse.
It opened up in June of 1929, and what happened a few months later in October? The crash of the stock market. We started to enter into the Great Depression. Within a few years, the New York Central Railroad, its revenue dropped like 60%. Its passenger revenue dropped 80%.
Nevertheless, it was a grand space and an architectural masterpiece.
It was breathtaking to go in there. I mean, it was the center of a big affair. They had a restaurant there, and they had all kinds of places that had souvenirs. I mean, it was really an experience for a young kid.
As a girl, Jean McCarthy got to see the terminal up close. Her father worked for New York Central and played a very important role in the station's operation.
He was an engineer, chief engineer for the power plant, and then was promoted. The title was chief stationary engineer, and that was over the whole depot. And it was quite a job for him, but he loved every minute of it. It was great, exciting.
It wasn't just a train station. It was a public space. You talk to people who grew up on the east side of Buffalo. It was a social affair to walk the corridors, to go to the restaurant, to go to the cocktail lounge, to see famous people.
We have the Three Stooges and company.
I distinctly remember going there to see the Three Stooges. As a young guy, I didn't realize that the Three Stooges used to play the Glen Park Casino all the time, and they would arrive in Buffalo by train.
Celebrities came to Buffalo, lots of them in those days. They didn't have television and things, so that was your only chance to see them. Jeanette MacDonald, she was the big star of the day. She was in a lot of beautiful Technicolor musicals. She was very talented. It was really exciting. It was a real cool place to be.
The crash of the stock market certainly hurt rail traffic, but World War II put it back into high gear.
Tens of thousands of servicemen and women coming through that building at all hours of the night. The rail lines coming in and out of Buffalo were bringing the raw materials in, and we were bringing out aircraft and tanks and automobiles and parachutes and everything you needed for the war effort.
Even through Vietnam, trains served a purpose. But when the war was over, the end of passenger rail became more and more obvious.
When you looked out the window, it overlooked the loading area and the unloading area for the trains. And you could see the poor guys that lost their lives in Vietnam. You looked out the window, you could see they had the coffins lined up. And it was just a chilling moment.
And so when the Great Depression hit, the war, the 50s, and moving out of the city, no one could foresee that.
Year by year, decade by decade, people just started to get away from using that big train station on the east side of Buffalo.
Now cars and planes were the preferred modes of transportation. Train travel became a fond but distant memory.
My husband had to go on a business trip. It was late 50s, and he asked me if I wanted to go, and I said yes, but I'm afraid to ride the plane. I didn't want to. So he said, well, we'll take the train, and we did. Took a little longer, but that was our trip to New York, and I loved it. And that was probably the last time. After that, my husband convinced me that if we wanted a trip to, if he was going to go for business, we should start taking the plane.
But the story goes from bad to worse. When we return, we'll tell you how the Central Terminal was raped and pillaged before a few people fought to save it. Too little, too late? We shall see when Retro Report continues. When the train stopped running, the terminal began a downward spiral. How could we let this happen? Yet, here we are. Coulda, woulda, shoulda. We pick up our story in 1979.
For 50 years, trains from all over the United States whizzed through the terminal on Podorowski Drive, but no more. The Central Terminal has closed its doors to all rail traffic. The last train pulled through at 4 o'clock this morning.
Even in its waning days, the Central Terminal stood as a sentinel over the east side of Buffalo.
I grew up in the neighborhood. You could see the building, and so it's like been here my entire life.
But the building languished. Unscrupulous owners stripped it, vandals destroyed it, and multiple city administrations turned a blind eye as the once mighty Art Deco masterpiece decayed right before our very eyes.
Amtrak left, and a character named Anthony Fedeli purchased the building, and he had a dream that there would be gambling approved by New York State, but it never happened. So he lost it on back taxes. It went up for city auction then. Jimmy Griffin was mayor. He didn't want the city to have title, and it only went for $100,000, and a guy named Telesco thought he'd have a wedding palace in there, and he ended up stripping the building, and I fought him on that, and he actually physically threw me out of the building. Because your business collapsed, your personal life collapsed, and you're destroying this neighborhood. You ought to be ashamed of yourself.
Than anybody,
No,
including you,
No, you didn't.
in this community ever did.
Violations all over the place.
Well, point them out.
What about all these windows broken here? That's violations.
Are they of what?
You asked the inspector. You betrayed the trust of the city of Buffalo. You betrayed the trust of the neighbors.
Freely dump here on a daily basis.
Yeah, because
we
you don't
pulled 20 dump trucks of garbage out of here yesterday.
It's your property.
Just another
What about
day.
everything you stripped on the inside of this national landmark and you sold?
David, anything on the inside of the building is no concern to you.
It is a concern of mine.
Is it really?
Yes, it is. Well, it was a disaster. He took many of the clock, a lot of the items that are in there, and people were breaking in, and so it was sickening. It really was.
Yet another owner failed to resurrect the vandalized structure and simply walked away, passing stewardship of the property to the CTRC for $1 in 1996.
A gentleman by the name of Scott Field heard that the Central Terminal was going to go up for auction. He came up with a dollar bill, and the judge said, "Do you have a plan? We're willing to preserve it," is what he told them. The Central Terminal Restoration Corporation was formed not too long after that.
A lot of devastation had taken place in a short time. it would take a little longer to heal the wounds of neglect.
It was a 5-point plan. Number 1, get good title to the building. Number 2, secure it. Number 3, get the weather out of it. Number 4, open it up to events. And then number 5, move on to development. So this is a 20-year-old master plan that we're kind of sticking to it. It took a long time to get here, but that was the plan initially.
As well-intentioned as the volunteer organization was, the cost of such a massive project meant that a lot of money was going to be needed.
We're going to be looking somewhere between $80 to $100 million probably, at least, to bring this to a properly restored level.
Meanwhile, volunteers cleaned up the property and made repairs, allowing the public to reconnect with their beloved terminal.
It's been a lot of work. We had tireless volunteers that have been with the program for over 15 years. They've been helping every Saturday, no matter what the weather is inside, and there's no heat in here.
But big money was still needed, and by now the entire surrounding neighborhood had been allowed to deteriorate as well. Things were not looking good.
The Broadway Fillmore generally was a vibrant, exciting neighborhood. And the Central Terminal, a lot of the neighborhood got its energy from the great activity that existed here.
The neighborhood is not too far gone, but it is a challenge to get somebody to want to come and invest here when you see that across the street.
In 2017, the community got excited when it was announced that $35 million was allocated to replace the small Amtrak station downtown.
That opportunity seems to have been lost, and I think it's one that this community and this city will regret. It would have served as a catalyst for the redevelopment not only of this building, but for a neighborhood that certainly needs an injection of positive economic activity. We will look back on 10, 20, 30, 40 years and say, my gosh, what were they thinking?
Canadian developer Harry Stinson thought he had a viable plan and still feels confident even though the CTRC rejected his proposal.
Yeah, I know it can happen. It's a question of time and money. And I'm not asking for any money. See, I'm a crazy Canadian. We don't have historic tax credits. We don't have all these incentives and loans and grants that everybody in Buffalo seems to live on to be a viable developer. Most of the developments in this town seem to depend on enormous handouts and incentives.
So why was the plan rejected? Stinson isn't the only one turned away.
This group of volunteers really feel a level of ownership that they're not willing to relinquish. I was a little disappointed that they didn't consider Brick City project to create a film studio for a film producer who produces films all over the country and is from Buffalo. I thought the Harry Stinson housing initiative was a good strategy.
We had lineups of people wanting to take floors in the office tower. We would have created a whole commercial node with residential and office right in that place. The mandate of CTRC was to search out and select a group or person to work with. They're more worried about what could go wrong, which is understandable. But meanwhile, the building continues to disintegrate. They just need to come to grips with the fact that at some point they need to let go.
No, the title will never leave the Central Terminal Restoration Corporation. It's not this is our building type thing. It makes business sense to keep the title in a non-for-profit that's a conduit for funding, things like that.
A stalemate or a tipping point? Maybe the real question is, how much time is left before it's too late?
The worry about saving it may in fact be what destroys it.
And unfortunately, sometimes you have to reach that tipping point. I don't know that we're there, but I think we're getting there.
A lot of things have come down, have fallen in Buffalo, but Central Terminal remains. And I think it should remain well into the future.
In all fairness, we did reach out to Byron Brown to get his point of view. The mayor's office said that they would get back to us, but they never did. But we'll be right back. Retro Report will continue right after this. 3 hours east of here lies a community that kept the wrecking ball at bay to save their train station. Today, it's used on a daily basis for everything from trips to trims. How do they do it? We went to Utica to get the story.
During the French and Indian War, Revolutionary War, This was the center of all military transportation. When New York Central was consolidated to become New York Central, Utica being in the center, they thought this would be their headquarters. They wanted a beautiful station. And this is why we have such a opulent building full of marble. Within 1 year, by 1915, they changed their mind. And so Utica was left with this gorgeous building, and it was not going to be the headquarters for New York Central. In 1974, this building was scheduled to meet the wrecking ball. The roof was leaking. New York Central had abandoned it. So some local folks got together, and they felt it was a shame to lose this beautiful building. They established what is known as the Greater Utica Landmark Society. And they worked to save the building. And with their efforts and fundraisers and grants, then along comes Congressman Sherwood Bullard, came along with some funds, and they saved the building. Eventually the county took over the building and have maintained it ever since and made it into a transportation center. We have all kinds of buses coming through here and the trains. And then they moved their Motor Vehicle Bureau here to use that. That corner of the building used to be a USO during the war.
Men have been deployed from every war that came after 1914 from this train station. It seems like everybody wants to get rid of anything historic today. There's a lot of history here. You know, a lot of famous people came here. Johnny Cash came here and got his haircut. Bobby Kennedy actually got his haircut here. It was quite a nice place, and a lot of people have enjoyed coming here for a long time. There isn't another barbershop probably in central New York that is like this barbershop. It's one of the few places that were original to the building that are still in operation. It's been run continuously for 105 years. It's never closed. And that is the only place in the building that can say that, you know. I'll tell you something, when I first came here, I was amazed at the people that still used train service. I couldn't believe it, but some mornings I'd look out there and there'd be 70, 80 people waiting for a train. And I didn't think that happened anymore. But the train is actually used a lot more than I ever dreamed that it was. And just that fact that it's a good service for everybody, with airfare the way it is today, and with flights being dangerous and flights being, you got to go through all this rigmarole to even fly today. Train is a very nice way to travel. You can get up, walk around, go to the bathroom when you want to, get a sandwich, get a beer. I think that's very important for travel in the United States. If it was up to me, I would put a lot more money into rail travel in this country today.
This whole neighborhood was what we call a throwaway neighborhood in the 1970s. It was so bad and so abandoned and deteriorated that the city just forgot about it. Well, in the meantime, it's been rehabbed. This place is booming with offices upstairs and a beautiful cafe for good lunches downstairs. I mean, it's starting to build up. Any community needs a transportation center hub to give it pride. It's kind of like a symbol of the community. Everybody knows Union Station. If you don't have pride in your past, you're not going to know how you got to where you are. You're not going to have the information to know where to go in the future. I mean, it all ties together. It's all part of one big story.
Further west in Ohio, the people of an entire community decided to save their train station. The similarities to our story are remarkable, except they already won. Let's listen and learn to the story of the Cincinnati Station Salvation.
It's a structure that is unlike anything else we have in Cincinnati, and people in Cincinnati have always shown an affection for the building like very few others. But in my life, the terminal has been struggling to exist on a very basic, do-or-die kind of level.
There There were 7 railroads that served Cincinnati, but they did so to 5 separate passenger depots. The construction work began in August of 1929. In 1933, when Union Terminal had its grand opening, it was, of course, a very great moment for Cincinnati. It was this thing they'd dreamed about since the 1880s, 1890s, finally came to fruition. But there was an interesting incident that I think is important. At the grand opening in 1933, someone, and I think it might have been a reporter, had been inside, was amazed by the building and its facilities, remarked to the president of the B&O Railroad, who was present. He said, "Oh, this is an amazing building. People are going to come from all over to see it." And the president of B&O turned to him and he said, "Yeah, but they'll come by automobile."
All aboard!
It was designed originally to handle up to about 17,000 people in the building every day, coming and going. During World War II, it actually handled double that. Union Terminal saw its peak usage, but as soon as World War II was over, passenger rail travel was already beginning to decline. There was a growth of the automobiles. In the 50s, the construction of the interstate highway system in this country. Airports were built all over the place. Air travel had a big boom after World War II.
It wasn't the best time for a passenger train station.
Maybe it didn't seem like a fight at first, but it was something people were aware of, and it continued to be a problem as the terminal moved forward, particularly into the 50s and 60s.
It was just this big iconic structure just sort of sitting there, doing nothing.
There was the opening in 1968 of a science center.
Personally, I had so enjoyed the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. I thought, well, maybe Cincinnati could have something like that too. Well, that evolved in later time into what became the Science Center. We looked at many different sites that were available around the city of Cincinnati, of which one was the Union Terminal.
Now, Union Terminal was still serving as a train station at that time, but the number of trains utilizing the building had declined to the point where it was feasible to put this science center in the building and actually have the science center occupy most of the concourse. Unfortunately, that science center only lasted a couple of years. I think it lasted until 1970 or 71. It didn't make it in the long run. And of course, by 1972, trains ceased operating to the Union Terminal entirely.
The building has been, in danger of demolition more than once. And I think for a structure of that type, if the use is not clear and the use is not fruitful, then you always run the danger of people saying, well, just tear it down and do something else there. But if you think about that kind of building being in existence in the 1930s, the 40s, the 50s, this was something that was definitely seen as a community asset.
At one point, the city actually advertised for ideas, offering a lease of, I think, $1 a year for an idea that was accepted by the city. Steve Skilkin of the Joseph Skilkin organization in Columbus was one of the developers who came to the city with this proposal to convert the building into an entertainment complex, which he was going to call the Land of Oz.
If you've seen any of the renderings, it has people roller skating, and it has restaurants, and it has shopping, and it has all that sort of stuff. The problem was, by the time we opened up, interest rates had gone from 6% to 22%, the highest in the history of the planet Earth.
In the 1980s, the Cincinnati Museum of Natural History and Science and the Cincinnati Historical Society had essentially run out of space in their buildings at that time. The two organizations began initially independently looking for new spaces, but pretty quickly it became evident that it made sense for the two organizations to look for a single facility that they could both move into.
Our original vision was something along the riverfront. What changed my mind was the first tour through the building. I mean, I began to think, my God, all the opportunity that this building presents. But where am I going to find the money for that?
We sat down together and put a timeline and a plan together of things we had to do and sequenced the plan. The end piece of the campaign was a bond tax levy.
And that's when reality set in. Cultural institutions didn't do that. They didn't go before the county and ask for help.
It was not a popular thing to have a bond levy because it's going to increase their property taxes.
And why should we keep putting more money into this white elephant? And literally, that was what the opponent said.
It came close to being destroyed by a wrecking ball.
But Cincinnati's Union Terminal began its new life today. The new $68 million museum complex at the terminal was dedicated during ceremonies this morning. For the first time in years, water flowed in the beautiful Art Deco fountains that grace the terminal entrance.
It really needed structural steel issues and issues with the exterior of the building and the windows and the systems. That had to be addressed for the long-term preservation of the building.
You can see that this building is a beautiful building from the outside, but we're told it will take millions of dollars in repairs to fix what's going on the inside here at the Museum Center.
Passing levies in the city is not an easy task.
But it really sailed, and it surprised me a little bit.
Issue 8 for Union Terminal has passed tonight, so Union Terminal will get refurbished.
64% or something like that of people who were so compelled by the history of the building, the stories of the building, and the future of the building. It's remarkable.
We need to keep Union Terminal not just for ourselves, but for future generations of people. And in order to do that, we have to make this big investment that will ensure it will be here for decades to come.
The initial opening and operation of it as a railroad station, there was the World War II phase. There was the decline of Union Terminal in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. There was the shopping center phase.
Love that building.
When we come back, we'll find out from a panel of experts just what we could do to turn this thing around. Is there hope for the Central Terminal, or is it a lost cause? We'll find out when we return. Welcome back to our program and our esteemed panel here, people who are quite familiar with not only the building but the city and the region. We have Councilman David Franchik, Fillmore District Councilman and history lecturer at Buff State. Of course, Carl Palladino, the chairman of Elka Development, and Mr. Tim Thielman, who is the executive director of the Campaign for Greater Buffalo and a principal in Spatial. So let me just ask you guys, David, I'll start with you because you have been involved in this thing almost from the get-go, even before the Central Terminal Restoration Corporation had it. How did we get to this spot where this beautiful Art Deco tower is floundering for so long?
First of all, I want to say I'm impressed because you really do have a round table. Those who helped save this building today will be remembered in generations and hundreds of years to come. This is our pyramid. This is our forum in Rome. This is our Acropolis. And what we do as a society with these buildings speaks a lot about us, and I think it's incumbent on us to do it.
There's no question, but how did we get to this position where for the last 30, 40 years, this building has allowed to deteriorate to the condition that it's in right now?
Well, the building could have been foreclosed by the city. I suggested to Mayor Griffin that the city foreclose and take title because it was turnkey, everything was in there, and then put an RFP out there. But no, the city wanted to put it out for auction. He didn't want the burden of this large building on the city's inventory, but I thought we should have struck title to us and then did an RFP because you didn't have to put anything into it. The building was turnkey, everything was in it.
And it didn't, and then people, it went through a series of owners.
Series of private owners knocked the hell out of it.
And then, now Tim, you were part of the original CTRC. You formed that organization?
Yes, but you know, to get to the councilman's points, there were two good things there. One is that it is Buffalo's pyramid. Okay, with all the positives and maybe difficulties associated with that. And then a key point, the city not wanting to take control of it when the opportunity was there.
So what is that? What is that fear? Carl, you've dealt with a lot of municipalities. I mean, you've rehabbed and rebuilt historical structures. You've been in this business for a long time. Why do people hesitate to take on something like that or to pass the buck? Is it the money? Is it the fear of failing? What do you think?
In my mind, it's pretty much its day hasn't come yet. It's only recently that we see a little rise here in Buffalo. We can sense and feel that maybe we should be thinking about expanding. The future of the Central Terminal was always hoped by guys like me of finding a corporate sponsor for it that would put their headquarters into the building.
Do you think it's possible? Is it out of the realm of reality because it's such a big project?
No, it's not out of the realm of reality. I disagree that the government should get involved. I think government should have had some format to have a not-for-profit that would be funded with a certain amount of money so that they could hold properties until their day came. That type of initiative, I would never turn it over to the city because the city doesn't have the capacity or the city workers don't have the inclination to go and make sure stuff like that is preserved, okay, in the best condition you can until such time as a use comes along.
When you started that organization, what was the purpose of it?
Actually, we did not want the Preservation Coalition to take this on because then we just become developers of the building. So we said, let's set up a nonprofit that can take public monies, maintain this thing, do events until such time things occur. But the building's got to be stabilized. We have to stop trespassing and dumping on the property. So we organized cleanups that drew 500-600 people. And the building is so significant, you can't imagine it not being there, and it would be a devastating blow to the east side. So let's do things incrementally, get people habituated to going there. There is a huge untapped market in people who really are willing to go into these neighborhoods because it's adventuresome. They don't see this architecture. They don't see these buildings anywhere else.
Urban exploration.
Yeah, exactly. But what does have to happen, and where we need some public involvement, the city, in fact, owns 3/4 of, when you look at this vast property, they still own it, and I agree that the city shouldn't own it. They should give this land to the Restoration Corporation so the entire area can be seen as one unit, because throwing money into the building when you control 25% of the site.
So incrementally, it's the same way that you eat an elephant, one bite at a time.
And it's been, Eddie, it's been over 20 years because the not-for-profit's been around for over 20 years, and that was negotiated in City Court Judge Broderick's office, because then the second set of owners, Mr. Tuckman, was written up for court because of what had happened, not so much from his fault, but from the previous owner, Mr. Telesco. And the judge said, either I fine you or you help the not-for-profit. We in government can create some of those synergies, but we can't create the ultimate final end use. We
Okay,
can
so
help
hang
it.
on to that thought. We'll be back with more of this conversation when our program continues. We're going to take a short break, and then we'll be back to continue on taking a look. Is there light at the end of the tunnel for the Central Terminal, or is it a train coming at us? We'll find out when we come back. Welcome back. Retro Report, the Central Terminal. We're having a conversation here about the past, present, and future of Buffalo's iconic Central Terminal on the east side of Buffalo. Gentlemen, it's been a long time. I understand that there's different points of view. Should the government be involved? Should the government not be involved? Should the non-for-profit run things? But the non-for-profit that currently owns it has had it now for over 20 years, and is how long before something has to happen? How long do we wait? Do we wait another 20 years? I mean, in your experience, have you dealt with any projects like this that have taken this long?
No, usually when we adopt something, we go right at it and we get it finished. That's one of the reasons I haven't adopted it yet. I haven't been able to formulate a project for it. My first view of the Central Terminal was turning the corner from Schiller Street onto Lovejoy Street as I walked down to School 43 in East Lovejoy, and that building sat there. And that image has stuck with me all these years. And yes, I've told others that I would love to be the developer on it, but I just haven't found the right project yet. The money that they've put into I think Tim was talking about the Martin House, it's huge amounts of money by supposedly specialists, okay, and whatever, but the money they've put into that house over the years is incredible.
So why could they get money for the Martin House, and why can't they get money for the Central Terminal?
That's an excellent question.
I hope you have an excellent answer.
Well, I think it's time for really leaders of the community to step up. The Restoration Corporation has never been able to attract Buffalo's real power brokers, and
why?
Its location on the east side is not where these people go all the time. They don't see it all the time. But
it's a difficulty of access to it.
Yeah. So look at the Richardson, how visible that is to it's across from the Albright Knox Art Gallery. It's near Delaware Park. The Martin House, it's in the Parkside neighborhood.
You can see the terminal driving down the thruway.
Well, yeah, but it does not have the immediacy. And what I'm calling for is for Buffalo's leaders, they know who they are, to actually get on the board of this Terminal Restoration Corporation, because they have leverage. A good start was made by the Urban Land Institute. One of the key takeaways from that report is, well, you're gonna have to somehow join the effort to restore the building itself with the larger neighborhood. And that connection has really never existed. That terminal was only built with one interest in mind: making it efficient for the New York Central Railroad to run trains in and out. So it does have to be a slow build where the civic consciousness builds up, says this is a cool place, this is a cool neighborhood. And
why did you leave the board? You started the organization, or one of the founders of the organization, and then you walked away from it. Why?
Well, at the time, there were a lot of things on our plate. We had filed a federal lawsuit on the canal. I just had to devote all my time to those issues. Still a lot of heavy lifting to go, but it can be done.
Do you think it will happen?
Other cities have done it. 2 years ago, I was given the nickel tour of the train station in Cincinnati, Ohio. They're spending millions of dollars, and I might say that it's about 5 miles outside of downtown Cincinnati, in the middle of nowhere.
So how did they turn theirs around?
Well, you see, they had their shakers and movers. What they did, they decided to move all their museums into this new building. But the renovation work, the materials, hundreds of workers, and I says, my God. But that was the movers and shakers deciding that's what they wanted to do. We need the movers and shakers. You're not going to move the museums there, but you need that type of people to.
How important, Carl, do you think it is to preserve an old structure like that? Some people will say, well, just knock it down, build something new.
No, I'm not like that. I got mad when they knocked down the old art. I said, its purpose will come. Just leave it up. Leave it sit there. Why is it bothering somebody?
Yeah.
You know, and they should never have knocked it down. You know, it costs a lot of money to knock it down.
Do you think we'll be able to turn the terminal around in our lifetime?
Oh, I think the terminal will turn. You know, I think something's going to come up one of these days that'll make it real. Okay, some need of some private sector operation or some not-for-profit to have a facility with the appointments. The problem is the big what do you call it, lobby there.
Yeah, the concourse. Yeah, the concourse.
It's just finding the right use for that is interesting. So,
how long do you think it'll take?
You know, it'll take as long as it takes, you know, but in the meantime, they are stabilizing the building. It is structurally sound. The problem is the developers in the past, there have been two, they came and they said, give us the keys and we'll do the project. Well, you got to show the money. You got to show that, you know, you just can't hand the building over because you're going to be back where you were.
Well, that's true, but it's in the development game, if I'm correct. You don't just show the money. You don't just say, here's $200 million.
Well, there's got to be some, reversionary agreements, or, you know, the developer has to be serious about it and not just going to be part of a portfolio.
Well, you got to get into the definition.
You know better than I do. I don't know.
I mean, there's real developers and there's people that pick up the tag and say, I'm a developer. And they don't have a clue.
One guy was that Bashar Issa who ended up in jail in London. I think it's going to happen. And Mr. Palladino know better than me because he's in that business.
Whether we can find a developer or not, there's no question that this conversation is ongoing and it's still developing. So there'll be more to come, I'm sure. Stay tuned. We will keep tabs on the future of the Central Terminal as well as the present. And hopefully the future is bright and the Central Terminal's best days are ahead of it. And thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate your time for joining us here and your input and your support in not only helping to preserve this building, but helping to make our city and our region a better place. Thank you so much. We'll be back with more right after this. Thanks for watching our program. If you'd like to find out more about what's happening here, follow All Aboard CT on Facebook and or Twitter to see what's happening here at Buffalo Central Terminal. Thank you for watching Retro Report. I'm Eddie Dobashevitz. We'll see you on the other side of the story.
I think the thing that's important for Buffalonians to remember is that Central Terminal belongs to all of us. It doesn't just belong to the people who manage, the volunteers who manage the board. It belongs to the entire community, and I think if we begin looking at it like that, it'll get broader support.
It wasn't only about the Amtrak station, but certainly $30 million spent here versus the $5 that will be spent would have made a big difference as a catalyst.
The building will be great again because I think there's enough consensus in the Buffalo community that this is important to its future.
They did it in New York City. Why couldn't we do it here?
This building is part of the self-esteem of our overall community.
You can't think small on something like this.
It's a fantastic landmark, and we can do essentially landmark-based development.
That was the opening door, the welcome mat to Western New York.
I remember Liza Minnelli came to Buffalo, and she arrived by train at the Central Terminal, and it was like 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. She told her driver at that time to stop at the first bar she sees so she'd get a drink. The first stop was the Clark Grill on the corner of Clark and Poderesky, and Liza Minnelli comes out of the car, walks into the Clark Grill, orders a drink. Everybody's turning around to look who she was. Half the people didn't know who she was. And I remember for all the years to come, after she finished her drink and left, that they took a chair inside the Clark Grill and they put a piece of masking tape on it that said Liza Minnelli sat here, and that chair was there like for 20 years after that.